Welcome to part 2 of the essential Supreme Court cases. Okay, this section is on Bill of Rights cases. These are mainly a review. We've looked at these already when we looked at the First Amendment and the other Bill of Rights. So basically running these down real fast. Engel versus Vitale. There was an official prayer in public schools in New York. This was in 1962 that had to be read by the principal or another school official before the school day, kind of like how we do the Pledge of Allegiance. That was declared unconstitutional. That violated the Establishment Clause. The public schools are not allowed to read a prayer because that's government. The schools are considered, public schools districts are considered a government. That's the government saying you have to say this prayer. They're establishing a religion for the school district. Okay, Wisconsin versus Yoder, that was 1972. Yoder is how you say that. Amish students in Wisconsin were, like all other students, were supposed to go to school until the age of, they had to go to high school basically. These were Amish students. I don't know if you know much about the Amish, but the Amish they are separated because of religious reasons from the rest of society. They live basically an 18th century lifestyle where they live in big communities and they basically raise crops. They don't use electricity or any other modern conveniences. They do things, they feel like that the modern world corrupts them and pulls them away from their religion. So they live a lifestyle that most people don't live anymore. So basically they work on farms, these big community farms. So the Amish students were supposed to go to school into high school, and the Amish parents sued, saying that by making their kids go to the public school, you're actually violating their free exercise clause, the free exercise clause of their religion, of the Constitution. I'm sorry, so they cannot freely exercise their religion. They want to, because they combine religion with everything. So they want to teach their sons and daughters past the 8th grade. So they won their case because they made the case to the court that they don't need to go to public school. They live a different lifestyle, so making them attend schools is a violation of their free exercise clause. Okay, Tinker versus Des Moines, that was the black armband case, that the students wore these armbands in protest of the Vietnam War. Remember, that's the one where the students won First Amendment rights. So your First Amendment doesn't kick in when you turn 18. When you're in school, you have the right to express yourself as long as that expression doesn't lead to an interference of the educational process. Schenck versus the United States, you probably studied that last year in American history. Schenck sent out, this is during World War I, sent out postcards to people in his town that got drafted for World War I, and this violated the law. Him doing this, you weren't allowed to interfere with the draft. So he ignored that and sent postcards to people that got drafted and said, in his opinion, the draft violates the 13th Amendment. You have to go into the army that makes you a slave, and that violates the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery. Feds got word of this, arrested him. He said, wait a minute, I'm expressing myself. I have a right to free speech. And the court said, not in wartime. In wartime, your rights can be curtailed. You created clear and public danger by violating the draft law, interfering with the draft, so First Amendment doesn't work for you. All right, here's one that we didn't cover, New York Times versus the United States. This involved what's called the Pentagon Papers. Okay, this happened in the late 60s. These papers, it was a multi-volume study of the Vietnam War. So we're in the middle of the Vietnam War. The military and the president at that time, the presidents were Johnson and Nixon. Nixon became president in 1969. So this happened when he was president. They kept telling the American public, they kept showing statistics of how many of our enemy we've killed. Look, we're like really close to winning this war. We just need another 10,000 more troops. And then we weren't winning, and they said, well, look how many more we killed, and we need another 20,000 troops. So This is when a lot of college students were saying, you're drafting us, but we're not winning. You're lying to us. So the Pentagon put a top secret study together about how the United States got involved in the war. And the conclusion that they came to was we shouldn't have got into the war because we can't win. This is the Pentagon saying this in the middle of the war, when publicly they were saying we're winning, we're winning, we're winning. Privately they're saying we're losing and we got to find a way out. So Daniel Ellsberg was I don't know if he worked, I know he worked in the Pentagon. I don't know if he was a member of the armed forces or if he was a contractor, but for some reason he got word of this study, and so it ticked him off. So what he did, these are big thick binders, like 10 volumes. So what he did was he took little bits of maybe 20 pages or so at a time, took them out of the Pentagon, brought him to a friend. His friend mimeographed to make copies of them, and then the next day at night, and then the next day he returned the parts of the binders that he had removed, and he did this for a couple of months and got away with it. Security wasn't as tight as it was today. So what he did was he took his copies and he gave them to the New York Times. This was a bombshell that the New York Times had. Of course they're going to publish this. You mean our government's telling us we're winning in public, but in private they think we're losing? So they started publishing them. And after they published one section of them, the Nixon administration sued for something called a prior restraint. Prior, of course, means before. They were trying to restrain the New York Times, and the Washington Post started publishing these as well. They wanted them to stop publication, prior restraint, because this is going to let national security secrets out. And I think you understand the value of a government saying, we don't want our battle plans to get out. We don't want the press to publish what we're going to, our military plans for the next 3 months in a war. That's going to, our enemy doesn't have to spy on us. All they have to do is buy a newspaper, and they can figure out what we're going to be doing. The Nixon administration sued, saying they asked the court to stop the publication, to keep the newspapers from publishing any more of these Pentagon Papers. And the court said, we're not going to do that because there are no national secrets in here. Nixon administration, this is the court, said the only reason you are trying to prevent this publication is because this leak study embarrasses the federal government. That's not what prior restraint is for. Prior restraint is really to keep national secrets from coming out. It's not to protect the government from embarrassment. So the reason this was important is because they really set this really high bar against prior restraint. In almost every case, the court said, we will defer to the newspapers. We want the public, that's what the free press is about, letting the public know what its government is up to. But if there's national secrets involved, national security secrets, then we won't allow that to be published. But they set the bar really high for the government to be able to do a prior restraint. Okay. Now next we're going to look at incorporation cases. I don't know if you remember earlier in the year we studied selective incorporation. It's when the 14th Amendment, which said states have to, people that are born in the United States are citizens. Citizens have rights, and states have to provide and protect these rights as well as the federal government. So what that means is freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, that on a case-by-case basis, if somebody brought it up that, hey, my state is taking away my right to bear arms, the Supreme Court would say, you're right, the Second Amendment has to be followed by the states. That's what incorporation means. And the reason it's called a selective incorporation is because they don't incorporate the entire Bill of Rights all at once. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis. Okay. First one is Gideon versus Wainwright. Gideon, I know we talked about this earlier in the year. This is something you took a look at earlier in the year. Gideon basically was arrested for burglary. You can see from his mugshot here, he's probably in his 60s, maybe his early 70s. He's a loser. And he's still, as an old man, breaking into pool halls, stealing booze. He stole a bottle of wine and some money out of the cash register. Okay? He was guilty. He was caught red-handed. The burglar alarm went off, and the cops said, "There he is. He's right there. Look at him drinking the wine and counting his money in the pool hall." So there's no question he was guilty. But he asked at his. This happened in the city of Panama City Beach in Florida. He asked, "Hey, this is a criminal case. Aren't I supposed to have a lawyer?" He was at least smart enough to do that. And the court said, "Well, this isn't a federal case. This is a state case. The state of Florida does not guarantee that you get a lawyer in your case. So you're going to have to act as your own lawyer." Well, not being a very bright man, he got the maximum sentence, which was 5 years. Okay. Now, while he's sitting in jail, he realizes, with all the time on his hands, I think I was wronged, and I think that I was supposed to have a lawyer. Yeah, I'm guilty, and I was caught red-handed, but at least I should have a lawyer. That's one of my rights. So, being his own lawyer, he had to file his own appeals. Here's how he filed his own appeals. He wrote letters to the Supreme Court of the United States saying, "Dear judges, I am in jail because of the state of Florida. I'm not saying I'm innocent, but I should have had a lawyer under the federal government's Constitution Bill of Rights." They agreed with him, and they said the Supreme Court ordered him a new trial. And by the way, they appointed him a lawyer to argue the case before the Supreme Court, and they gave him a guy named Abe Fortas. They gave him a good lawyer, a really good lawyer. Abe Fortas, like 2 years after this, was appointed by President Lyndon Johnson to be a judge on the Supreme Court. So they gave him a pretty good lawyer. Okay, they ordered him a new trial, this time with a lawyer. He was found guilty. Okay, but at least his rights were protected. Okay, and because of his actions, no matter if it's a federal case or a state case, if it's any criminal case, if somebody cannot have a lawyer, if they can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed to them. Okay, he was found guilty, but they suspended his sentence. They said, "You've served enough time in jail. Your sentence is suspended." Now, I called him a loser before, but actually, it turns out he's not a loser. He's a guy who wins. He's long deceased, but he won this right. People today still have that right, whether they're charged by the state of Ohio, by the city of Cincinnati, by the federal government. If it's a criminal case, they will have a lawyer appointed to them if they can afford one. Okay, Roe versus Wade is another incorporation case. This is the case that legalized abortion within the first trimester of a pregnancy. Okay, so the court looked at the 3 trimesters, and a woman named Jane Roe, that's not her real name, she wanted to have an abortion. Texas, where she lived, outlawed abortions, except in cases of rape and incest. Okay, now, she was an honest person. She was asked by her doctor, "How did you get pregnant?" And she's like, "It was, this happened and so forth, and I don't want to have another child." Most people lied in Texas, and they said, "I was raped," or it was incest, my uncle did this to me. The doctor said, "Are you sure that's your story?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" And she changed her story to she was raped. However, there were no court records of her rape. So she was lying. The court knew she was lying. She had the doctor's like, "All right, we can't do this." So the child, she came to term, and the child was adopted. But she pushed on, and she said this violates her right to privacy under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Okay, the court previously had ruled in other cases that even though the right to privacy doesn't exist, those words don't exist in the Constitution, if you take like the Third Amendment, which prevents the government soldiers from coming into your home and making themselves at home and sleeping there and eating your food. Fourth Amendment, if they need a warrant to come into your house, the cops need a warrant to search your house. They said, there's a right to privacy. You have the right to against government interference and invasion into your life. So that includes health. So the court ruled in her favor, even though she had already given her child up for adoption and delivered the child. So here's what the court did. The court set up a trimester system. They said that for the first 3 months, since you're pregnant for 9 months, the first 3 months is the first trimester. They said that a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy cannot be taken away. That is an absolute right during that part of the pregnancy. The second trimester, from the 3rd month through the 6th month, the court said states are allowed to regulate that. They can't outlaw it, but they can regulate it. For instance, if a woman wants to terminate a pregnancy during her 2nd trimester, a state can say, well, you have to do that at a hospital because there's danger to the mother's life if she terminates the pregnancy. So they want to have an attending physician on hand in case she needs emergency medical care. And the court said in the 3rd trimester, abortion can be outlawed. Okay. Now the next incorporation case involves, this is the newest one, this happened in 2010, McDonald versus Chicago. It applied the Second Amendment to the state. Okay, this is Mr. McDonald here. He since has passed away. Otis McDonald. Okay, lived in a neighborhood in the city of Chicago. At one point, it was a fine neighborhood, but over time, as he lived there, he watched the neighborhood decline, and the crime rate went way up into his neighborhood. His house was broken into 5 separate times. He was sick of this. He wanted to have a gun for protection, to intimidate people, to put a sticker on his front door, I have a gun, and stay away. But the city of Chicago had banned at this time all handguns. Having a handgun, buying a handgun, selling a handgun in the city of Chicago was illegal. The reason the city of Chicago did this is because they did their research and they said, we have a high crime rate. Most violent crimes are committed with a handgun. Let's ban all handguns. And it worked. Crime went down, except in Mr. McDonald's neighborhood. Okay? He had hunting guns. These were, this is things that have bird shot and deer shot in it. Okay? Those are going to hurt somebody. They're not going to kill them. So it's hard to intimidate somebody with, a shotgun that has bird shot in it. So he had hunting guns. He had permits for them. He felt like these wouldn't offer him protection. So he went to buy a handgun. They asked him for his address. He said, sorry, you live in the city of Chicago. You can't buy a gun. He said, that violates my right to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment. I have a right to protect myself. And the Supreme Court of the United States agreed with him and invalidated Chicago's handgun ban. Now, that incorporated the Second Amendment, and that's the newest amendment that had been incorporated to the states. Okay, another one is a civil liberties case, Brown versus the Board of Education. I know you know this case. You've studied this many times in school. Basically, race-based school segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Separating people by race violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.